If you've been feeling lost, disconnected, or like life just isn't lining up anymore, this isn't a mistake. It may actually be how guidance shows up before things change. Most people think that guidance feels clear and peaceful, but very often it begins as confusion. And I want to say this clearly. If you've been questioning yourself, maybe wondering if you're doing something wrong, or feeling like you've lost your connection, you haven't. What's actually happening is that an old way of being guided just no longer fits, and something deeper is trying to take its place. And here's what we're going to go through today. First off, we're going to cover why feeling lost is often a signal, not a failure. Second, we'll discuss how guidance actually shows up when spirit just feels quiet. And third, we'll discuss how to start trusting that guidance again without forcing clarity or trying to figure your whole life out. Because without understanding what this season of confusion actually means, a lot of people stay stuck just thinking they're broken, questioning their intuition, forcing decisions, and feeling anxious because nothing feels clear. But when you really understand what's really happening, that pressure eases. You stop fighting the confusion. You stop blaming yourself. And you start moving forward with a lot more trust, even before you have the answers. So let's discuss this first point, because this is where most people misunderstand what feeling lost actually means. You see, we're taught usually that if we're being guided, things should feel clear, peaceful, settled. But in real life, guidance rarely starts that way. Very often, feeling lost shows up when an old direction no longer fits, but a new one hasn't fully formed yet. And that discomfort you feel isn't because you're disconnected, it's just because you're in transition. Now, feeling lost isn't a sign that you've failed, not in any way. It's just a signal that something you've outgrown is now falling away. See, the mind hates this space. It wants certainty, timelines, answers, so it panics. But confusion is often what guidance feels like when it's rearranging something deeper than a decision. So if you've been feeling unsettled or restless or maybe unsure, that doesn't mean that you're off track in some way. It just usually means that the old map no longer works and you're actually waiting for a new one to draw itself. And this is where a lot of people get discouraged, because when spirit feels quiet during this phase, they just assume now they're disconnected. But that's not what's happening at all. See, I want to share something kind of personal here because I've been in this space more times than I can count. There have been periods, a lot of periods in my life where everything on the outside looked fine. Work was going well, things were stable, but on the inside, something felt completely off. I didn't feel inspired, I didn't feel clear, and spirit certainly didn't feel loud. It just felt quiet. And my mind immediately went to that place. What am I doing wrong? Why don't I feel guided anymore? Why does nothing feel like it fits? I started panicking. But looking back, every one of those seasons came right before something important shifted. Not because I forced it, but because something old was started to fall away. At the time, it felt like I was lost. But now I recognize it was just something getting repositioned. And if you're listening to this and thinking, yes, that's exactly how it feels, I want you to know something important. That space that you're in isn't a void. It's just a transition. Nothing has gone wrong. Something is just rearranging. So let's talk about the second point. I'm going to talk about how guidance actually shows up when spirit feels quiet. This is where a lot of people get tripped up. When spirit feels quiet, they assume that guidance has stopped or that they've somehow lost their connection in some way. But silence doesn't usually mean absence. Very often it means guidance that has changed form. See, early on, guidance often feels pretty obvious. Signs, reassurance, a sense of being held in some way. But as you grow, guidance stops explaining and starts positioning. And when spirit feels quiet, guidance often shows up as things like maybe a loss of motivation for what used to excite you, or maybe a resistance that you can't think your way out of, or maybe a pull towards something that you don't fully understand yet. You're not sure why, or maybe a feeling of slowing down, even when your mind wants to just rush ahead. See, the mind doesn't like this kind of guidance. It wants instructions, timelines, certainty, absolutes. So when those don't arrive, anxiety fills the gap. But this quieter form of guidance is not punishing you. It's training you to listen in a much deeper way. See, I've seen this again and again when people stop demanding answers and start noticing how life is nudging them through maybe times, emotions, and redirections. Things begin to make sense. And once you recognize that, the next question naturally becomes, well, how do you trust the guidance without forcing clarity or trying to control the outcome somehow? And that brings me to point three. This is where we're going to talk about how to trust the guidance again without forcing that clarity. See, this is where I want to name what we've been talking about because it actually helps people relax when they realize there's actually a framework for this. What you're experiencing is something that I call existential guidance. See, existential guidance is the kind of support that helps you feel grounded, guided, and reassured when life brings up the big questions, maybe about loss, meaning, purpose, connection, or what comes next. It's not about getting answers, it's about feeling steady and supported while those questions are still unfolding. In other words, it doesn't remove uncertainty, it holds you steady inside it. Now, existential guidance works underneath clarity. It helps you stay oriented when you just don't know what's coming next. Maybe when something has ended or when the old version of your life no longer fits, but the new one just hasn't arrived yet. And this is why people often feel guided even when they're still questioning everything, because guidance isn't trying to rush you past the questions, it's just helping you stay supported inside them. And that's why existential guidance shows up through grounding, through your nervous system, your emotions, your sense of steadiness, not through certainty or instructions. And I want to slow this down for a moment because when people hear this, there's often a quiet sense of relief. Oh, all right. Well, at least I've got an explanation for this. Not because they suddenly know what to do, but because they realize they don't have to rush past the questions anymore. Existential guidance doesn't ask you to solve your life. It supports you while life is reshaping itself. So instead of asking, well, what should I do with my life? Try asking something just a little bit more gentle. Maybe like, what helps me feel grounded and supported right now? And then just notice your body. What brings a little steadiness? What eases the pressure, even just slightly? That sense of steadiness is existential guidance at work. And this is also why having support, like practices or reminders or maybe gentle guidance, matters so much when people are navigating loss or meaning, because no one is meant to hold these questions alone. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from all of this, it's this. Feeling lost doesn't mean you're disconnected. Quiet doesn't mean guidance has stopped. And confusion doesn't mean that you're broken. Very often it means something old is just falling away. And a deeper kind of guidance is helping you stay supported while what comes next actually begins to take shape. And if you want help building this kind of awareness consistently, I've put together a free Spirit Guide Connection starter kit. It gives you simple daily practices that you can use while you're just living your everyday life. So you can start recognizing your spirit guides without overthinking or doubting yourself. And you'll find the link to that in the description or the show notes. And you see, once you start noticing this quieter kind of guidance, a very natural question comes up. Well, how do you tell the difference between real guidance from spirit and my own thoughts or imagination, especially when nothing feels dramatic or obvious? That's perhaps the most obvious question and most common question. See, that uncertainty is where a lot of people start doubting themselves again. And that's why I created the episode titled 15 Ways to Know That It's Spirit, Not Your Imagination. In that episode, I walk you through how to tell when guidance is actually coming from spirit and when the mind is just filling in the blanks. So you can trust what you're receiving without second guessing yourself anymore. So thank you for being with me today. Keep raising your vibration. Love and light. This is Chris.